for being here. This is a lovely afternoon with you. So I'm going to start with our moderator here, who's going to carry the panel today. This is Liana Horowitz. She is a history professor across the street at the University of Hawaii Maui College. She's also a contributor to the program guidebook that many of you are holding, that we were able to print for this exhibition, and a wonderful writer, a terrific person. She's agreed to moderate this panel today. We'll start with the artists. Orly Cogan is here from New York. Kanani Miyamoto, visiting from Portland. Abigail Romanchak, homegirl. Paul Mullowney, who is living in San Francisco. And Sandow, Birk, and Elyse Pignolet from Los Angeles.
Aloha kako. So nice to be here. Such a pleasure and such an honor to be included in this discussion on art and activism and decoding the issues that we see in the visual arts. I teach both world history and American women's history at UH Maui College, and my specialty is U.S. Cultural and social history, which is really a telling of our stories from the bottom up, and including those voices that have maybe been marginalized, neglected, completely left out of our telling of history. And so this inspires me, it excites me, it empowers me, and I hope the exhibit here today empowers you as well. The arts are important, they're essential to our human experience. The ability to create a narrative, to create fiction, something that doesn't actually exist outside of our imagination, and to then act on those values is what makes us human and makes us different from every other animal that exists. And the ability to act in a positive way or in a negative way based on a story is what I want to talk about today a little bit, and how the arts help us to make sense of our own lives and kind of navigate the world around us. And one of the pieces, we're sitting in front of Elyse and Sandow's American procession. And one of the people featured in this procession is the late, great Nina Simone. And she has said that an artist's duty is to reflect the times. And I think that our panelists here do that so expertly. I have a few guiding questions just to have us think about as we kind of try to process this idea of art and activism. How do artists create conceptually driven work? And what is their approach to activism in their work? And how does politically driven art affect us all? And how do these artists hope that it impacts their audience? So those are kind of the guiding big questions. And I'll start at the end of the table and kind of work our way down a bit. And starting with Elyse and Sandow, I'm wanting to see if you can help speak to the story of how it began, speak to your collaboration with Paul, and how the American procession materialized.
We met Paul Mullowney nearly 20 years ago when he was working at the Hui Noiau in Makauau and invited us to come over and do a print project. So we came over and did that, and then we came back maybe a couple years later and did another print project that took a couple years. And then Paul has since moved to San Francisco, where we've done more print projects with him. So we've been working with him ever since we met him. But it all started here on Maui. For this project in particular, he contacted us a couple years ago, just by coincidence. It was shortly after the presidential election, and he said he had a space in his schedule to do a new project and a new printing press that he wanted to use, and that led us to start thinking about what project we could do. And naturally, we were so obsessed with the election that had just happened that we wanted to do something that was political and made statements that we believed in, and that was the beginning of this project.
Yeah, I don't know how much more I can add, but it did happen pretty naturally. We've collaborated before, so that's a natural thing for us to do. And because of the climate, because of the election, we were pretty motivated and it was a natural transition to want to make something and make it political and bold, and we really felt like as artists you can have a voice, and we were ready to use that voice, I guess. And we sort of had this motto, it was the year to be big and bold, and we were interested in being active, and besides the we were frustrated in the fact that there was much more besides joining in some of the protests that were happening and donating money. But as artists, it was really a natural thing for us to do something political. And there is this history of print media and being political and using it as a voice to get a message out there. So it all sort of came about pretty naturally.
And when kind of looking at the impressive amount of people that you've included in this procession, kind of both on the left and on the right, did you start from a contemporary look at our modern society and kind of look backwards, or did you start from an historical point of view and find your way forward? What was the process like?
That's an interesting question. I think Sandow and I, we collaborated from the very beginning, so as far as the concept and the people, but we also joined, we had some friends who we could bounce ideas off of and debate who could be in the procession and who maybe shouldn't, and so I think we jumped around. You can't help but sort of start in your own sort of filter and lens and what's happening in your own context, but as we researched figures, and then you start to learn definitely more about what led up to what's happening in that person's life and in that history. So it's sort of jumping around, I think. I don't know if you...
Not necessarily a linear progression forward or back, or kind of jumping in.
It was debated, hotly debated,
Hotly debated. I'm always interested in the voices that get left out. Was there, for all three of you, was there a person you really wanted in this procession, but you got outvoted?
That's a really good question.
No. I mean, we made it. We put in whoever we want.
No, I would disagree. I mean, there was... we had to limit. So there was a point where, I guess, for the civil rights era, there was a lot of musicians who were really part of that, and it became the voice, some of the musicians. And we only I thought of that because of Nina Simone, but there was probably, we had talked about a lot of musicians in that era that could have easily have been put into the left. Or in the women's suffrage movement, there's only a couple of key figures, but there was a lot of women I sort of was like, yeah. But we had to sort of limit and move along history, so.
Paul, was there anyone that you were hoping would get into the procession that didn't make it?
Well, to be clear, the concept is all the artists. I'm merely the publisher, and I lead the group of printers who do it. But so I give the artists complete freedom to do what they want. If there's something really objectionable that I feel that I can't publish, that's never happened. That might be a question. But no, I loved their choices, and I thought it was really well done. Yeah.
Well, we hope it's still relevant 50 years from now. Maybe there'll be extensions to it with new people. But I think we hope that all our works, we try to make works that are political and about social issues without being really super bold, in your face, one-sided, simplistic. We try to make complex works that you can ponder and think about and argue and have a disagreement with us and look up things on your phone, and works that are interesting on lots of levels, and hopefully that makes them last longer.
Thank you. Paul, to transition to you for just a little bit here. You're a printmaker. You've printed Abby's work. You've worked with Sandow and Elyse for a long time. Can you speak to your process of shifting from the technician to the artist in this particular show?
Yeah, it's a difficult shift to go from publisher and printer to having my own studio practice, which is not always ongoing, and that's a choice I made a long time ago. So for this show, I was very excited to have the opportunity to get back in the studio. I think the one main thing is that my work is very in that room is very ephemeral. It's very rough. It's very it's not technical. It's not made to be editioned, reproduced, and sold. It's made to be pasted on the wall and torn off the wall and maybe destroyed. And that's not the case with everything else I do in my professional life. As a publisher, I'm creating works that have to be made with archival materials for the museums and galleries, and it's a big shift, but it's really freeing to be able to get back in the studio and just make a mess, you know?
You've mentioned that Zen Buddhism is a big influence in this particular piece. The idea that meditation can lead to self-discovery and enlightenment. You've written about art as prayer and prayer as meditation. And you've asked the question, can art change anything? Can art help to provoke a collective energetic shift? And yet you've mentioned that this will be, kind of destroyed when it's finished, that this particular exhibit. Does that help to keep the artist in the present? Does it help to keep you as an artist in the present? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that process.
I think so, yeah. It's difficult. I don't know. I do a lot of activism. I wouldn't say activism. I do a lot of social justice work through with my students and through my press. We publish broadsides, and we do community work with students. We have letterpresses where we can create prints that are, we can do 100 impressions an hour, but they're still handmade. And this doesn't totally answer your question, but in terms of printmaking as a political device, it's always been very important to me. And I mean, when you think about it, the American Revolution couldn't have happened without the printing press. The Bible couldn't have been disseminated without the printing press. Japanese and Korean and Chinese sutras were the first time they used movable type, long before Gutenberg. So I always tell my students, to have a press is to have power. This is a concept of kind of like using the image of the Jizo produced over and over and over again. Many iterations of the Bodhisattva Jizo is a sort of meditative thing to me, to bring me back to center, to kind of, I don't know if it worked or not. I'm a pretty high-strung guy, but I'm trying to start at home before I can make politically active work. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm still struggling and searching through it. So I'm kind of going back to the source of Zen Buddhism. I'm not a practicing Buddhist. As Alan Watts said, in the summer I'm a nudist, in the winter I'm a Buddhist. So. I take it when I need it.
Well, your gallery space certainly feels like a safe space to retreat and regroup, and I wonder if you think that as a society we need that before we can act.
Yeah, I think I created it for that reason. In grad school, I had a few students in this last semester who were creating spaces similar to that. It's kind of like, I think artists are really concerned with creating a space inside a gallery or a museum where we can come out of the hustle and bustle into this refuge and just think for a little while and calm yourself and put your phone down and really engage with the art. And that's what I'm trying to do there. You have to bow down a little bit as you go in, like a Japanese tea house. There's a slight act of humility to go inside, and yeah, just kind of leave your cares outside the door. That's kind of what I'm after. Yeah.
I think there's an interesting contrast between art to soothe the soul, to calm the viewer, and directly next door we have Orly's very bold images, which may make viewers feel uncomfortable and challenged. And I think that is an interesting contrast. And Orly, your work honors the traditional labor of women's work, spinning fiber for cloth, weaving, needlework and sewing. And this is not only the traditional work for pre-industrial women, but historically where they also found their own political power, especially in the 19th century Industrial Revolution. You've mentioned that you hope your work helps to overcome stereotypes. And I find it very interesting when we take a look at the word feminine and we change just 2 letters and we create feminist. We have 2 very opposing meanings. Something very soft and gentle is associated with feminine, and yet something very strong and firm we associate with feminist. Just 2 short letters. And I wonder if you could talk about that kind of dichotomy in your work.
Well, I mean, it's a great observation, one you just came up with, I think, yesterday, that term, and said it to me, and that's, and it's perfect. It really encompasses everything that's in that room, in a way. Fiber, feminist, feminine, it's all there. Like I said in my artist statement, I'm drawn to the dichotomies, and I think our society and is so polarized right now with the current administration kind of, seeming like at every turn trying to dial things backward. And so I'm using something, a material that has history to it already, intrinsically, in the materiality of it and in the slow process of it, and that it's primarily all done by women historically. But at one time it was more to sort of busy their hands while the men were doing the real work, or practice their alphabet, their cross stitch to make it perfect as children or whatever it is. So going back doing that, going back into that and bringing it forward with strong political figures, with portraits, with the idea of taking those initial materials and breathing like a fresh contemporary angle into that, still with humor and irony, keeping it with the times. I think is a nice, powerful message where I give reverence to the history, but continue on with the future of feminist.
Handwork is kind of a political act these days in a technological society where you slow down and you do something slowly by hand. Did you always start out this line of work thinking it would be a political statement, or did that activism evolve over time?
I was trained as a painter, but I had a background as a child of doing lots of fabric work. And my mother collected old samplers and vintage fabric, so I lived in a home with lots of folk art and vintage materials around me. And as soon as I started thinking about doing my art with sewing, associated that kind of material and the process of sewing, it was immediately feminist issues. It was a natural way. I think I had that material, to me, those old samplers, had such a history of being sort of prudish, spinster, heavy thing, like, oh, my grandmother used to do that, and it had this, laden with this history that those people didn't have thoughts and ideas and sexuality, and I like to turn that on its head and throw in some nudes. And in the beginning, it was more about issues that I had as a single woman wanting to take charge and portraying it on those kind of fabrics that were bed linens or tablecloths or something like that, something that was made originally for a domestic home type thing. But then later, as I became a mother, it became the net of what I was saying in a political way broadened and continued to expand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You mentioned the playful and the serious of the women in your work, and I wonder about perhaps the need to desensitize ourselves to the human body in order to have real discussions about sexuality, about what it means to be a woman in the 21st century, what we teach our children about the feminine and the feminist, how we change the narrative of our female heroines. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you'd like to speak to that at all.
It's a complex topic. The main reason I find that I like to do news is because for me it's timeless, it's classic. It's like the old paintings I studied in Italy. It separates us from class, from fashion, from socioeconomic. It evens the playing field. And so you can really get to the storytelling of it all in a very lyrical, more like art history kind of way, rather than being bogged down in other areas that I might not be talking about at the time. If they're clothes, then it tells you a lot about it. You know, fashion or time. It also pigeonholes you a little bit with historically, depending on the fashion you put your figures on into. So this, I feel like, keeps it more open-ended.
Thank you. Kanani, much like Orly, your work brings women into the forefront of the art, telling their own stories as both the artist and the subject matter. It can revolutionize our understanding of the family, about economic relationships, political relationships, the distribution of power. And you're reclaiming authorship for women and Indigenous women. And one of the things that happens historically with imperialism and colonization is that societies like many of the Pacific Island nations in Polynesia and the Pacific, in which women had very historically strong positions, not only in their family, but politically in their societies, that story gets erased. And your work helps to kind of bring their voices and their images back to the center. And I wonder if you'd like to talk about that a little bit in Disrupting the Gaze.
I really wanted to put that focus on the strength of our women, specifically Polynesian women. I think when we see Polynesian women in museums, they portray kind of an exotic beauty, you know, a sexual object rather than a mother, a caretaker, a healer, you know. So that was my main goal.
And you include a lot of imagery in your work. You have the kalo, you've got the ulu, you've got loa-e fern. Would you like to speak at all about those very specific images that you've included in your piece?
Yeah, I included the kalo and the ulu for, you know, nutrition and sustenance. But there are small, subtle things in those plants as well. Like the ulu I have up there is actually the Tahitian version of ulu. So there are some small little things. And I've included the monstera plant, which is not native to Hawaii. And it's kind of a plant that we see on aloha shirts, on coffee mugs. And it kind of promotes like this fantasy, you know, this romantic version of Hawaii when it's not even really a part.
Something that's been introduced. What about the process itself? Both you and Paul create your exhibit as you're installing it, and how did that go? How did that process go for you versus having a preconceived idea, knowing your story that you wanted to tell, and what's for you as an artist? What's that process like?
I absolutely love it, and I was thinking more about it this time because, you know, it took me about 3 days to install this work, and the whole time I'm here, people are coming in and out, so I get to talk to other people about the work too, you know, so it becomes, I feel more connected to the community here at the MAC, you know, because of that experience. And they start to say things about the images that are put up, and I start thinking a little more, and then I start thinking about the next project, you know, or how I can make this more powerful or mean a little more to others.
What do you hope the viewer walks away from when they leave the exhibit space?
I think a kind of overwhelming feeling towards these women, you know. I intentionally put them up high, so you have to physically look up at them instead of, you know, looking down at them or viewing them as just an object, you know.
Thank you. Abby, you also have an Indigenous focus in your artwork. And you've taken a sensory experience, an oral sensory experience of bird songs, and you've translated into a visual sensory experience. And maybe you could talk a little bit about your process in doing that?
Sure, yeah. In thinking about this body of work, you know, I was born and raised and I grew up on the island of Maui, and I think I always took for granted that I would hike in these native forests and these endemic birds to Hawaii would always be there to be seen and heard. And as an adult and a parent, I'm realizing these voices are disappearing way quicker than we ever expected them to. And so this body of work was originally inspired from a short video I saw that the Smithsonian produced, and it was talking about the story of the Kauai'o'o bird. And in 1987, the male Kauai'o'o bird, who mates for life, called out to his female mate expecting an answer, and he never was answered. His call went unanswered. And it was a really powerful story for me to ponder. And then I kind of took a microscopic view into Maui and what's happening with our endemic birds on Maui. And I wanted to highlight the kiwikiu and the akohekohe, which are incredibly endangered at the moment. I'm sure many of you who read the Maui News read a recent article about the kiwikiu being located from Waikamoi, which is East Maui, to Nakula Forest Reserve, which is Upper Kaupo. And the ornithologists and the birders who work for Maui Forest Bird Recovery Project are hopeful that with this translocation of the kiwikiu, this species has a chance. Because if we leave them where they're at, due to climate change and temperatures rising, avian malaria is reaching this bird species and quickly killing off this bird species. And so we'll walk in the rooms later, but this large piece here highlights the kiwikiu and akohekohe. Like I said, two of Maui's most endangered birds. And I just thought it's interesting to observe sounds from nature and hear these sounds from nature and then express them visually. And so I created these large-scale collograph prints, and they are spectrograms. For those of you who don't know what a spectrogram is, it's a 3D visualization of sound that measures frequency, time, and pitch. And so to a lot of you, those might just look like black squiggles. But if you go into my room, there's an audio component too, and you can put on those headphones and hear the bird call of the akohekohe and kiwikiu. And then in my other piece called Kahea, that highlights how many birds have already gone extinct. It's shocking and it's staggering, but 72% of all Hawaiian birds have reached extinction. The lower black portion of that piece represents the birds that have gone extinct. The upper third represent the endangered and extant living Hawaiian birds. And I titled that piece Kanilea, which means a distinct sound, because I think it's important to remember, even though like this symphony of Hawaiian birds is dying and this mele of our land is being extinguished, like we still have it. There are still distinct sounds being heard. There are things we can do. There are things being done. In this room alone, there's about 5 or 6 amazing conservationists that are making a difference every day with reforestation projects and relocating these very fragile birds.
Thank you.